And now, it's my pleasure to introduce your first Vice President, David Keene.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking you for being here, for allowing me to serve you as a member of the leadership team headed by Ron, for the opportunity to work with Wayne and with Chris, for your willingness to stand up for our rights under the Constitution, for being a part of the NRA family, and for granting me a few minutes of your time this morning. I work these days in Washington, D.C., but at heart, I'm a Wisconsin boy. I grew up in the Midwest, and I learned to hunt, fish, and enjoy the outdoors from my grandfather. Like many of you, my first gun wasn't a Remington or a Winchester, but a Daisy. And with it, I practiced gun safety and developed the ability to at least occasionally hit a target. After a while, I graduated to a real gun, a .22 caliber Winchester with which I pursued squirrels in the woods of Wisconsin. And then, when I was 14 or so, my folks told me I could have my own shotgun if I could mow enough lawns and shovel enough snow to earn the money to buy one. Remember, this was Wisconsin. That shotgun gave me the ability to wander the fields and the hedgerows in search first of rabbits and pheasants, and later from a blind, ducks and even geese. I remember those days well. Many of us would take our shotguns to school so that we wouldn't have to waste time going home for our gear before rushing out after class for a few hours in the field before supper. I can't for the life of me remember anyone objecting. Firearms and the joy of using them was part of life back then. Oh, I'm sure there were a few spoil sports who couldn't understand why anyone would want to hunt, and a few more who found guns abhorrent for one unexplainable reason or another. But frankly, I'd never heard of PETA. The Humane Society hadn't been completely taken over by lunatics. Gun control was something you hoped for when buck fever threatened. And Michael Bloomberg didn't yet have the money to buy a pink sweater or rent a politician. We joined the NRA to get the riflemen and to learn more about firearms, about competition, collecting, and to dream of owning some of the exotic and not so exotic guns we learned about in its pages. That, my friends, was a far, far different world from the one we find ourselves in today. We never dreamed back then that the rights we took for granted as part of our heritage as Americans would be targeted for extinction by politicians and organizations with little respect either for the reasons the founders of our country found them so important or the uniquely American culture they seemed so intent upon destroying. In those days, most Americans, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, moderates, intellectuals, professionals, and men and women who worked with their hands lived in a larger community of shared values. That, unfortunately, is no longer true. In today's world, the rights you and I took for granted growing up, the rights our forebears spilled blood to secure and protect, and the rights we fully expected to pass on to our children and grandchildren are under constant attack. We live in a world in which politicians ignore and even openly and sometimes proudly proclaim that the Constitution of this country doesn't matter much. A world in which they believe they should have the power to impose whatever rules and regulations they want on the rest of us. In order to remake a world, a nation, and a culture they neither understand nor appreciate. They blame us, you, me, and those who share our values for all the world's ills. They believe that if they could disarm us, silence us, and break us, the world would be a better place. They ignore history and the experience of other nations. They ignore the rights so important to most Americans in their single-minded quest to remake the world in an image they would find more comfortable. They blame us for urban crime, international drug wars, and they're incapable of distinguishing the difference between a rabbit hunter, a gun collector, and a crazed killer. They ignore the fact that our founders recognized when they penned the Second Amendment to our Constitution that, as George Washington put it at the time, free people should be armed. This meeting, this association, and the tens of millions of our fellow citizens who look to us for leadership are the only reason they have not thus far succeeded. Look around you. Look around you for a minute. The men and women in this room, the millions of hunters, shooters, collectors, and Americans who own guns to protect their families make up the largest and most effective group ever organized to defend the constitutional rights of the American people. This association has been there when politicians have sought to gut the First Amendment and rewrite the Second. We beat them in election after election when they've been honest enough to campaign openly on the desire to strip us of our rights. We fought them to a standstill in the Congress and rolled back their worst excesses, and we've defeated them in the states. We've beaten them in the courts, and have thus far, to their amazement, even managed to defeat their attempts to use the United Nations as a tool to circumvent the Constitution and our rights as free men and women. But the threat continues, and though you and I and our friends might like to spend more time at the range or in the field, we have to continue to devote as much effort as necessary to protecting our rights and those of our fellow citizens. We must work, each of us, to bring more Americans into the NRA, to help us tell our story, to help us fight our fights. It is because we're willing to do these things whenever and wherever we have to that I am confident that we will prevail in the future as we have in the past. It's our willingness to stand together that makes me so proud to be a part of the NRA family. I thank you for what you've done thus far, and I know that future generations are going to look back in awe and in gratitude for what you will still do. Thank you very much.